She stood in the rain, 7 months pregnant, clutching her swollen belly as her husband Daniel threw her last suitcase into the muddy driveway. But this wasn't the first time. This was the final act in 3 years of hell. Elena had endured things no human should endure. Daniel would lock her in the basement for days when she disrespected him by making dinner late. His mother Margaret would force her to scrub the floors on her hands and knees, even as her pregnancy advanced, calling her lazy when she struggled to breathe. His mistress Victoria had been living in their home for 6 months, sleeping in their bed, while Elena was banished to a small storage room with no heating. They starved her intentionally. "Pregnant women don't need that much food," Margaret would say, snatching Elena's plate away after 3 bites. Elena's body was failing. Her baby was measuring small. Her face was hollow, her arms were bruised from Daniel's grip, her spirit was shattered into pieces. But tonight was different. Tonight, Elena had finally told Daniel she wanted a divorce, that she couldn't take any more. That's when his mask completely fell off. Daniel grabbed her by her hair and dragged her down the stairs. "You think you can leave me?" he screamed, throwing her belongings out the door. "You're nothing! You came from nothing!" Victoria laughed from the doorway, wearing Eleanor's wedding ring on a chain around her neck like a trophy. "Look at her, so pathetic. Your baby is probably as worthless as you are." Margaret walked up slowly, looked Eleanor dead in the eye and spat in her face. Then she did something worse. She grabbed Elena's belly and squeezed hard, so hard that Elena screamed in pain. "You and that bastard child should have never existed," Margaret hissed. Elena stumbled backward, falling onto the concrete driveway. Pain shot through her stomach. She felt something warm running down her legs. Blood. The baby. Something was terribly wrong. "Please," Elena whispered, tears mixing with rain on her face. "Please, I need a hospital. The baby—" Daniel kicked her suitcase toward her. "Walk. Crawl. Die in a ditch for all I care. You're not my problem anymore." When he saw that photo, saw his name carved in his daughter's flesh, Thomas Wellington collapsed. His head of security caught him before he hit the floor. "Find her," Thomas whispered, his voice breaking. "Find my daughter now." But they were too late. By the time his team traced the hospital location, by the time his private jet landed, and his convoy of SUVs roared into that small rural town, Elena had been in the ground for 18 hours. Thomas Wellington, the most powerful man in the country, stood at a cemetery clerk's desk and heard words that destroyed him. "I'm sorry, sir. Jane Doe 2471 was buried yesterday in Section D, Plot 847. No marker, no ceremony. It's policy for unclaimed bodies." Thomas fell to his knees in that dusty office and screamed. The sound was inhuman, the sound of a father's soul dying. His security team had never seen their boss show emotion. Now they watched him crawl across the cemetery grass to an unmarked patch of fresh dirt and claw at the ground with his bare hands, sobbing, "My baby, my little girl, what did they do to you?" They exhumed her that night. Thomas paid $1 million to have it done immediately. When they opened that cheap wooden coffin, Thomas saw what Daniel had done to his daughter. She weighed barely 90 pounds, her body covered in old bruises and new ones, her face sunken, signs of prolonged starvation and abuse. The medical examiner would later testify she'd been systematically tortured for months. The baby was found still in the hospital, clinging to life. Thomas had her transferred to the best NICU in the country within 2 hours. Little Elena Marie II would survive, but barely. Thomas Wellington buried his daughter with a funeral that stopped the nation. The cathedral held 10,000 people. World leaders attended. The golden casket cost $3 million. And behind that casket, Thomas had arranged something else, a presentation of evidence. On massive screens throughout the cathedral, he played everything. Security footage from the house showing Daniel beating Elena. Audio recordings of Margaret forcing her to work while bleeding. Photos Eleanor had secretly sent to a friend, showing injuries, showing the locked basement, showing the storage room she'd been living in. Text messages between Daniel and Victoria planning how to get rid of the problem once the baby was born. The world watched in horror. The service was broadcast live. 5 billion people witnessed Thomas Wellington's fury. "My daughter," Thomas said at the podium, his voice amplified across the nation, "endured 3 years of hell because she wanted to believe in love. She tested Daniel Morrison's character, and he revealed himself to be pure evil. He didn't just fail the test. He tortured, starved, beat, and ultimately murdered my pregnant daughter." He turned to the cameras, his eyes blazing. "Daniel Morrison, Margaret Morrison, Victoria Chen, I'm coming for you. And I'm bringing the full weight of the law, justice, and money that can move mountains. You will pay for what you did to my Elena." Daniel saw the broadcast from his living room, Victoria beside him, Margaret in the kitchen. They'd been laughing about something when the news broke in with "Breaking Trillionaire's daughter found dead after abuse." The colour drained from Daniel's face. "No," he whispered. "That's not... She's not..." But there on the screen was Elena's face, alongside her father's, with the caption, "Elena Wellington, 28, daughter of Thomas Wellington, found dead in rural hospital after fleeing abusive marriage." Victoria screamed. Margaret dropped the wine bottle she was holding. Within 1 hour, police surrounded their house. Not local police, federal agents. 20 armed officers storming through the doors with a warrant for their arrest on charges of murder, torture, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. Daniel tried to run. He was tackled in the backyard and dragged through the same mud where he'd thrown Elena's suitcase. Margaret tried to claim ignorance. They showed her the videos of her squeezing Elena's pregnant belly, forcing her to work while injured. Victoria tried to seduce one of the officers. He looked at her with pure disgust and cuffed her roughly. The trial became the most watched event in history. Thomas Wellington spared no expense. He hired 15 of the world's top prosecutors. He had Elena's body examined by 50 independent medical experts. Every bruise documented, every broken bone catalogued, every sign of starvation and abuse presented to the jury in graphic detail. The defense tried to claim it was just marital problems and disciplinary measures. The prosecution showed videos of Daniel dragging Elena downstairs, locking her in the dark, starving her intentionally. They showed Margaret's gleeful cruelty, forcing a heavily pregnant woman to scrub floors for 12 hours. They showed Victoria's messages. "I can't wait until that baby comes out so we can get rid of her permanently. Maybe we don't even need to wait." The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 47 minutes. Guilty on all counts. The judge, a woman who'd lost her own daughter to domestic violence, looked at Daniel with pure hatred. "Mr. Morrison, you are a predator. You targeted a vulnerable woman, isolated her, tortured her systematically, and murdered her through abuse and neglect. You showed no mercy. You will receive none." In that country, the death penalty still existed for extreme cases of murder with torture. The judge continued, "I hereby sentence you to death by fire, the same burning pain you inflicted on my daughter's soul through your cruelty. Sentence to be carried out in 90 days. The courtroom erupted. Daniel collapsed, screaming. Margaret fainted. Victoria vomited. Margaret received life in prison without parole. Victoria received 40 years for conspiracy and accessory to murder. Both would die in prison. But Daniel's sentence sparked international debate. Human rights organizations protested. Death by fire is inhumane, they argued. Thomas Wellington stood before the cameras and said calmly, "Inhumane is what Daniel did to my pregnant daughter for 3 years. Inhumane is starving her, beating her, locking her in basements, making her crawl in her own blood. He burned her soul alive every single day. Now he'll understand what that feels like." Thomas used his billions to fight every appeal, every delay tactic, every legal maneuver Daniel's public defenders attempted. He had lawyers working 24 hours a day, filing motions, presenting evidence, ensuring justice wouldn't be delayed or denied. 90 days later, in the state execution facility, Daniel Morrison was led to a specially constructed chamber. The method was controversial but legal in that jurisdiction for extreme murder cases. Death by burning, designed to be as quick as possible while fulfilling the sentence. Thomas Wellington watched from behind one-way glass, holding a photo of Elena. He'd wanted to see Daniel's face when he realized there was no escape, no mercy, no last-minute pardon. Daniel screamed and begged. He cried for forgiveness. He claimed he'd changed, that he was sorry, that he'd never meant to kill Elena. Thomas pressed the intercom button. His voice filled Daniel's final chamber. You had 3 years to change. 3 years to show mercy to a woman who loved you. You showed her hell instead. Now face yours. The execution was carried out at 12:01 a.m. Daniel's screams lasted 18 seconds before he lost consciousness. It was over in under a minute, far more mercy than he'd shown Elena during 3 years of torture. Thomas watched it all. He didn't feel satisfaction. He didn't feel revenge. He felt empty. Because even with Daniel dead, Margaret rotting in prison, Victoria's life destroyed, his daughter was still gone. Thomas dedicated the rest of his life to raising little Eleanor Marie II and to changing laws. He used his billions to create the Eleanor Wellington Foundation, which pushed for stricter domestic violence laws, better protection for pregnant women, harsher penalties for abusers. He lobbied for Elena's law, which made it mandatory death penalty in cases where pregnant women were murdered by intimate partners through systematic abuse. The law passed in 15 countries. On the 10th anniversary of Elena's death, Thomas stood at her tomb, a massive marble monument in Wellington Cathedral, and spoke to her as he did every day. I got justice for you, my darling. Daniel burned for what he did. Margaret will die in a cage. Victoria knows what it's like to have everything stripped away. I made them pay with everything I have. But I'd give it all, every penny, every company, every building, just to have you back for one more day. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I'm sorry I let you test the world alone. I'm sorry you suffered. Little Elena Marie II, now 10 years old, placed flowers on her mother's grave. She looked just like Elena, the same kind eyes, the same gentle spirit. Grandpa says you were testing people's character, Mama, she whispered to the stone. You found out who they really were. You were so brave. The story of Elena Wellington became a legend, a warning, a lesson that echoed through generations. Schools taught it. Churches preached about it. Parents told their children, treat everyone with dignity because you never know who they are. But more importantly, treat them with dignity because it's the right thing to do. Daniel Morrison's name became synonymous with evil. His execution footage, though controversial, was studied in criminal justice programs as a case of extreme punishment for extreme cruelty. Some argued it was barbaric. Others argued it was justice. Thomas Wellington never remarried. He never smiled again except when looking at his granddaughter. He built an empire of protection for abused women, shelters in every city, legal aid funded by billions, escape networks that saved thousands of lives. But every night, he'd stand at his penthouse window, looking at the cathedral where Eleanor rested, and he'd whisper the same thing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry you suffered. I'm sorry I let you face monsters alone. And somewhere in that cathedral, in the most beautiful tomb money could build, Eleanor's name was carved in gold letters 10 feet tall. Eleanor Marie Wellington, beloved daughter. She tested the world and found its cruelty. Her death changed nations. Her love lives forever. Below it, a second inscription, added by Thomas himself. Daniel Morrison, Margaret Morrison, and Victoria Chen tortured and murdered this innocent woman and her unborn child. They paid with everything. Remember her name. Remember what hatred costs. Remember that justice, though late, will always find the wicked. the world remembered. And the test Elena had given humanity, the test of character when no one important was watching, became the test by which we measured ourselves. Daniel failed that test and burned for it. Margaret failed and rotted in prison for it. Victoria failed and lost everything for it. And Elena, beautiful, kind, trusting Elena, paid for their failures with her life. That was the tragedy. That was the lesson. That was the story that would never be forgotten.